Emma and Liam Porter had been married for 10 years. Like many couples seeking a fresh start, they decided to leave their cramped apartment in the city and move to the countryside. The advertisement for the house was too good to resist. Spacious Victorian home, recently renovated, priced for quick sale. It seemed like a dream come true. The moment they arrived at the house, nestled at the end of a winding, tree-lined road, Emma felt a twinge of unease. It wasn't the peeling paint or the overgrown garden that set her on edge, it was the house itself. Something about its looming, angular frame seemed to watch them. "What do you think?" Liam asked, his voice tinged with excitement. Emma forced a smile. It single quotes as ... perfect. But as they crossed the threshold, the air inside felt different, heavy, charged. Emma thought she heard a faint sigh, but Liam, ever the pragmatist, dismissed it as wind whistling through old boards. They unpacked quickly, eager to settle in. That night, as they lay in bed, Emma thought she heard voices, whispering. She strained to make out the words, but caught only fragments. "Not safe ... leave ... She shook Liam awake. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Liam groaned, half asleep. "It's an old house. Houses make noise." Emma wasn't convinced, but she let it go. She chalked it up to nerves and exhaustion. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder. By the end of their first week, Emma's unease had blossomed into full-blown dread. Doors creaked open on their own. Shadows moved where no light should have cast them. The whispers became more distinct, carrying words she dared not repeat. Liam remained oblivious, focusing instead on renovating the house. Determined to understand the strange happenings, Emma visited the local library. The librarian, a frail woman with piercing blue eyes, hesitated when Emma mentioned the address. "That's the old Whitaker house," she said finally. "It's had its share of tragedy." Emma pressed her for details. The original owners vanished in 1892. The second family didn't last a year before. Well, the husband went mad and killed his wife. The place has been empty more often than not. People don't stay long. Emma's stomach churned. She wanted to ask more, but the librarian's lips tightened into a thin line. That night, Emma confronted Liam with what she'd learned. "It's just a story," he said, brushing her off. "People love to make up ghost tales about old houses." But as he spoke, the lights flickered, and a deep, guttural voice echoed through the room, "Get out." The next morning, Emma woke to find scratches on the walls of the bedroom. Long, jagged marks that hadn't been there before. They spelled out one word: leave. She showed Liam, who paled but insisted it was a prank. By who? Emma demanded. Were miles from anyone. Reluctantly, he agreed to call a contractor to inspect the house, but the contractor never arrived. His truck was found abandoned a mile away, the driver nowhere to be seen. That evening, the whispers grew deafening. Emma covered her ears, but it was as if the voices were inside her head. They screamed of pain, betrayal, and rage. When she finally opened her eyes, she saw the walls no longer blank, but covered in dark red symbols that pulsed and writhed like living things. "Liam," she screamed. He came running, but the moment he entered the room, the symbols vanished. "You need sleep," he said, but his voice wavered. For the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. That night, Emma dreamed of a woman in a tattered white dress, her face obscured by shadow. The woman reached for her, whispering, "Save us." When Emma woke, her arms bore the faint impression of handprints, as if someone had grasped her in her sleep. What do you think is hiding within the walls of this sinister house? Will Emma and Liam unravel the mystery before it's too late? Stay tuned for the next chilling session of The Whispering Walls, a house that never sleeps. Emma woke with a start, her breath shallow and heart pounding. She could still feel the phantom grip on her arms from her nightmare. The woman in the tattered dress had seemed so real, her presence almost tangible. As morning sunlight seeped through the curtains, Emma's resolve hardened. She needed answers. Now. Over breakfast, Emma confronted Liam. Something is wrong with this house, she said. We need to leave before it's too late. Liam's skepticism was evident, but before he could respond, a loud crash echoed from the basement. The sound was sharp and sudden, like glass shattering. Both froze. Did you hear that? Emma whispered. Liam nodded, already moving toward the basement door. Emma grabbed his arm. Don't, she pleaded. We should call someone. And say what? Liam asked, pulling free. That our basement is haunted? He grabbed a flashlight and opened the door. The stairs creaked ominously as he descended. Emma hovered at the top, wringing her hands. Minutes passed, each one feeling like an eternity. Then Liam called out, Emma, come down here. You need to see this. Her legs felt like lead as she descended. When she reached the basement, her breath caught. The walls were covered in old, faded drawings, charcoal sketches of faces twisted in anguish. Their mouths open in silent screams. It just fell, Liam said, kneeling to pick up a fragment. There's no reason it should have come off the wall. Emma's gaze was fixed on the largest shard of the mirror. The reflection was wrong. While the basement behind her appeared as it should, her own image was distorted. Her face seemed gaunt, her eyes sunken, and behind her stood the woman from her dream. Emma screamed and stumbled back. Liam turned, alarmed. What is it? The woman, Emma gasped. She's in the mirror. But when Liam looked, the reflection was normal. He frowned. Emma, there's nothing there. That night, Emma's dream was more vivid than ever. The woman's voice was a whisper, but this time, Emma could make out the words. They won't let us rest, the woman said. Find the ledger. The truth is in the ledger. Emma woke in a cold sweat, her heart racing. She wasted no time. As soon as the sun rose, she began scouring the house. Liam watched her, concerned but unwilling to argue. After hours of searching, she found it. A small, leather-bound book hidden in the attic, tucked beneath a loose floorboard. The ledger's pages were yellowed with age, filled with spidery handwriting. It detailed the Whitaker family's history, but what caught Emma's attention were the final entries. They spoke of rituals, sacrifices, and a dark entity bound to the house. Liam, Emma said, clutching the ledger. This house is cursed, the Whitakers. They summoned something, and it's still here. Before Liam could respond, the whispers returned, louder than ever. The room grew cold, and the walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting like lungs. A low growl reverberated through the house. We need to go, Liam said, his voice tight with fear. We can't, Emma replied. Not yet. We need to end this. Will Emma and Liam uncover the secrets of the ledger and put an end to the house's curse? Or will they fall victim to the dark entity that dwells within? Find out in the next session of The Whispering Walls, a house that never sleeps. The whispers turned into a cacophony, an unbearable roar that seemed to come from the walls themselves. Emma clutched the ledger tightly, her knuckles white, as Liam tried to calm her. But even he could no longer deny what was happening. The house was alive and it was angry. We need to find out what they did, Emma said, her voice trembling. The Whitakers summoned something, and they paid the price. If we don't stop it, we will too. What do we even do? Liam asked, pacing. We're not. Exorcists, we're not prepared for this. Emma opened the ledger to the final pages, her eyes scanning the faded ink. There's a ritual to banish it, she said, but we need to finish what they started. It says we need an offering. An offering. Liam echoed, his voice rising in disbelief. What kind of offering? Blood? Emma whispered. Liam stared at her, horrified. No, absolutely not. There has to be another way. But before they could argue further, the room grew icy cold. The lights flickered and died, plunging them into darkness. In the dim glow of the flashlight Liam grabbed, shadows began to coalesce into forms twisted, nightmare shapes that advanced on them with malevolent intent. Run, Emma screamed, pulling Liam toward the basement. The ledger had mentioned a specific location in the house, beneath the foundation. It had to be there. They stumbled down the basement stairs, the flashlight beam shaking wildly. The shadows followed, their whispers now screams of rage. At the center of the basement, the symbols on the walls began to glow, pulsing with an eerie red light. In the middle of the floor, a circle had been etched into the concrete, filled with intricate runes. "This is it," Emma said, dropping to her knees and opening the ledger. "We need to follow the instructions exactly." Liam hesitated, his gaze darting between the shadows and his wife. "Emma, are you sure about this?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "We don't have a choice." Using a shard of broken glass from the shattered mirror, Emma made a small cut on her palm. She winced as blood dripped into the circle. The house trembled, the walls groaning like a wounded animal. The shadows recoiled, their forms twisting in agony. Liam grabbed her arm. "What now?" Emma read aloud from the ledger, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. The words were in a language she didn't understand, but they seemed to resonate, each syllable striking a chord deep within the house. The air grew heavier, and a deafening roar filled the basement as the shadows writhed and shrank. But then, the ground beneath them cracked, and a skeletal hand burst through the floor. A figure emerged, a grotesque amalgamation of bone and shadow. Its hollow eyes fixed on Emma. "You cannot undo what has been done," it growled, its voice reverberating through the basement. "Yes, we can," Emma said, her voice defiant. She grabbed Liam's hand and continued the chant, louder this time. The creature screamed, its form dissolving into smoke as the symbols on the walls flared brighter. With a final, piercing wail, the entity disappeared. The house fell silent. The oppressive weight lifted, and for the first time since they arrived, the air felt clear. Days later, as Emma and Liam packed their belongings, they couldn't help but glance at the walls, half expecting the whispers to return. But the house was quiet. They left the ledger on the kitchen counter, a warning for whoever came next. As they drove away, Emma looked back one last time. The house stood still and silent, its secrets buried once more. But she couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't truly defeated it, only delayed the inevitable. What did you think of Emma and Liam's battle with the darkness? Did they truly escape? Or is the house waiting for its next victims? Share your thoughts and stay tuned for more chilling tales from the shadows. The forest was vast, ancient, and uncharted, sprawling for miles beyond the small town of Blackwood. It was the kind of place where children dared each other to venture just a little farther, where legends of curses and vanishing travelers were whispered around campfires. They called it Hollow Pines, a name as old as the town itself. When Ella Thompson accepted an internship in environmental research, she never imagined she'd find herself here. The assignment was straightforward: survey the ecosystem of Hollow Pines and catalog its flora and fauna. Her professor, Dr. Alan Grant, insisted it was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. "Just stay on the marked paths, Ella," he said with a laugh. "And don't believe the ghost stories." Ella didn't believe in ghosts, but something about Hollow Pines unnerved her. The trees seemed tall, their branches entwined like grasping hands. The air felt heavier here, colder, even in the height of summer. On her second day in the forest, she found something strange: a circle of dead trees, their bark blackened and brittle. The soil beneath them was bone-dry, as though the life had been sucked out of it. In the center of the circle stood an old, withered stone, covered in symbols she couldn't decipher. She took photos and notes, planning to show them to Dr. Grant later. As she turned to leave, the wind shifted, carrying with it a faint, mournful wail. It sounded almost human. Ella froze, her heart pounding. "Just the wind," she whispered to herself. But she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. The town's library was small, its shelves lined with dusty volumes no one had touched in years. Ella's research led her to a book of local folklore. She flipped through its pages until she found an entry about Hollow Pines. According to the legend, the forest was cursed over a century ago when a group of settlers attempted to drive out the indigenous tribe that lived there. The tribe shaman, desperate to protect his people, performed a ritual to bind their spirits to the land. But the settlers retaliated, slaughtering the tribe and leaving their bodies to rot among the trees. They say their spirits never left, the librarian said. Startling Ella, the elderly woman peered at her over wire-rimmed glasses. The forest keeps what it takes. Those who venture too far never come back. Ella forced a smile, but her unease deepened. She thanked the librarian and returned to her motel, unable to shake the story from her mind. That night, she dreamed of the dead circle. In her dream, the blackened trees came alive, their branches reaching for her as the mournful wail grew louder. The next morning, Ella resolved to return to the circle. This time, she brought a recording device and a small vial to collect soil samples. As she hiked deeper into the forest, the air grew colder, the trees denser. The sunlight barely penetrated the thick canopy overhead. When she reached the circle, it was exactly as she'd left it. But as she stepped closer to the stone, she noticed something she hadn't before, scratches in the earth, as though someone or something had been clawing at the ground. Her pulse quickened. She knelt to take a soil sample, her hands trembling. The moment her trowel touched the earth, the wind rose sharply, howling through the trees. The mournful wail was back, louder now, closer. She spun around, her eyes searching the forest, but she saw nothing. "Hello," she called, her voice shaky. "Is someone there?" The only response was the wind. Then, she heard it, a low, guttural growl. Panic surged through her as shadows moved at the edge of her vision. Grabbing her gear, she ran, her breath ragged, her heart pounding like a drum. When she finally burst out of the forest and into the open, she collapsed to her knees, her body shaking. She glanced back, half expecting to see something chasing her, but the forest was still, silent. That evening, as Ella reviewed her recordings, she heard something she hadn't noticed before. Beneath the sound of the wind was a voice, faint but clear. "Leave this place." Her blood ran cold. The legend wasn't just a story. Something was in Hollow Pines, and it didn't want her there. What do you think Ella discovered in Hollow Pines? Will she heed the warning, or will curiosity drive her deeper into the cursed forest? Stay tuned for the next chilling session of Lost in the Woods, The Curse of Hollow Pines. Ella couldn't sleep. The voice on the recording played over and over in her mind. "Leave this place." She had checked it a dozen times, hoping it was a trick of the wind or a glitch in her device. But each time, the voice was unmistakable, as if the forest itself had spoken to her. By morning, her fear had given way to determination. She wasn't ready to leave, not yet. Something was happening in Hollow Pines, something no one could explain, and she intended to find out what. Ella packed her bag with more equipment, a portable GPS, extra batteries, and a small first aid kit. Before heading out, she stopped by the town's diner. The locals gave her wary glances as she entered, their whispers barely concealed. "You're the one poking around in the woods," a gruff voice said. Ella turned to see a man in his 60s, his face withered by years of hard labor. "Best to leave well enough alone. I'm just doing research," she replied cautiously. He shook his head. "That forest doesn't like strangers. It's taken plenty before. Don't let it take you, too." His words sent a chill through her, but she thanked him and left. She couldn't let fear control her, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. The forest was even more foreboding the second time. The deeper she ventured, the quieter it became, as though the trees absorbed all sound. Even the birds seemed to avoid this place. Ella followed her GPS carefully, retracing her steps to the circle of dead trees. When she arrived, she was startled to find something new. A crude wooden totem stood near the stone, its shape vaguely humanoid, adorned with feathers and bones. It hadn't been there before. Ella's stomach churned as she snapped photos of the totem. The scratches in the earth were deeper now, almost as if something had been digging with desperate force. Her instinct screamed at her to leave, but her curiosity won out. She knelt to examine the stone more closely, tracing the strange symbols with her fingers. A sudden gust of wind swept through the circle, carrying with it the faint scent of decay. The voice returned, clearer this time. "You should not be here." Ella stumbled back, her heart hammering. "Who's there?" she shouted. The forest answered with silence. She felt the weight of unseen eyes upon her, the sensation so oppressive it was hard to breathe. Gathering her courage, she planted her recorder next to the stone and pressed record. As she trekked back to the edge of the forest, the sense of being watched never left her. Shadows moved just beyond her vision, and twice she heard the low growl she had heard before. By the time she reached her car, her legs were shaking. That night, Ella played back the recording. At first, there was only static. Then, faintly, she heard it. Voices, overlapping and disjointed. Some wept, others screamed. One spoke directly to her. "The forest is cursed. It will take you, too." Ella's hands trembled as she replayed the message. This wasn't just folklore. Hollow Pines was alive, and it was angry. The next day, Ella returned to the library, desperate for more information. She found a journal written by one of the original settlers, its pages brittle with age. The entries detailed the settlers' conflict with the indigenous tribe. One passage stood out. "The shaman warned us, disturb the forest and it will take its vengeance. We didn't listen. Now, the trees whisper, and shadows walk among us. The forest keeps what it takes." Ella's heart raced. The journal confirmed the legend. The ritual had bound the spirits to the land, and now they were lashing out at anyone who intruded. Her thoughts were interrupted by a loud knock on the library's door. She turned to see the man from the diner. "You've stirred it up," he said, his expression grim. "You need to leave before it's too late." That night, as Ella prepared to leave, she heard a knock at her motel door. When she opened it, no one was there, but on the ground lay a single feather, its tip stained with blood. What will Ella do next? Will she escape the curse of Hollow Pines, or will the forest claim her like so many before? Stay tuned for the next chilling session of Lost in the Woods, The Curse of Hollow Pines. La didn't sleep that night. The blood-stained feather sat on the desk in her motel room, a grim reminder of the warning. Despite the fear gripping her, she couldn't abandon her search. Something tied her to Hollow Pines now, as if the forest itself had reached out to her. The next morning, she packed her equipment again, but this time she included a small knife and a canister of bear spray. It felt futile, but the weight of the items gave her a fragile sense of security. She decided to return to the dead circle one last time to uncover whatever truth the forest was hiding. The drive to the forest's edge was uneventful, but as she stepped onto the trail, the air grew thick, heavy with tension. The familiar oppressive silence returned, broken only by the crunch of leaves beneath her boots. The more disoriented she became, the path seemed to twist and change, trees rearranging themselves like a labyrinth. "Stay calm," she whispered to herself, clutching her GPS. But even the device seemed unreliable, its screen flickering erratically. When Ella finally reached the circle of dead trees, it felt different. The air buzzed with energy, and the blackened trunks seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. The totem was gone, replaced by a shallow pit filled with charred bones. At the center stood the stone, its symbols glowing faintly in the dim light. As she approached, the wind rose sharply, carrying whispers that coalesced into a single, anguished voice. "Why do you disturb us?" Ella frowned. "I want to understand," she said aloud, her voice trembling. "What happened here? Why are you angry?" The forest seemed to groan in response. The ground beneath her feet trembled, and shadows began to gather at the edges of the circle, forming vague, humanoid shapes. One stepped forward, its form flickering like smoke. "We are bound here," the shadow said, its voice echoing with sorrow. "Our lives stolen, our peace denied." "The settlers," Ella whispered. "They killed you," the shadow nodded. "Their greed unleashed a curse upon this land. Now, we linger, trapped between worlds, How can I help? Ella asked, desperation creeping into her voice. The shadow gestured to the glowing stone. Break the bond. Destroy the stone. Only then will we find peace. Ella hesitated, staring at the stone. If the shadow was telling the truth, destroying it might end the curse. But what if it was lying? What if breaking the stone unleashed something far worse? Before she could decide, the forest erupted in chaos. The shadows surged forward, their forms twisting into grotesque shapes. They screamed, their voices a cacophony of rage and despair. Ella stumbled back, clutching the knife as they closed in. Do it, the shadow cried, before it's too late. Summoning every ounce of courage, Ella lunged toward the stone. She raised the knife and drove it into the glowing symbols. The moment the blade made contact, a deafening roar filled the air. The ground shook violently, and a blinding light erupted from the stone. Ella was thrown backward, landing hard on the ground. As the light faded, the shadows began to dissipate, their anguished cries softening into whispers. The oppressive weight lifted, and the air felt clear for the first time. Thank you, the shadow's voice said, faint and fading. You have freed us. When Ella woke, the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the forest. The circle of dead trees was gone, replaced by healthy saplings swaying gently in the breeze. The stone had crumbled into dust. Ella gathered her belongings and made her way back to the trailhead. This time, the path was clear, and the forest seemed almost welcoming. But as she reached her car, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within her. Hollow Pines had left its mark. Days later, Ella submitted her report, omitting the supernatural details. She left the town of Blackwood, vowing never to return. But in the quiet moments, she could still hear the whispers, faint and distant, reminding her of the lives she'd helped set free. What did you think of Ella's journey through the cursed forest? Do you believe she truly ended the curse, or has she merely awakened something else? Share your thoughts and stay tuned for more haunting tales. The Forgotten Doll, A Curse Unleashed. The little antique shop sat at the edge of town, its windows cluttered with faded trinkets and dusty relics. Few people ventured inside, except for collectors and the occasional curious passerby. Emily Carter wasn't either. She stumbled upon the shop while killing time before her train, drawn in by a sudden downpour. The shop smelled of aged wood and damp paper. Shelves lined the walls, crammed with mismatched porcelain, tarnished silverware, and other forgotten treasures. Emily wandered aimlessly, her fingers grazing the odd objects as she went. That's when she saw it. Tucked away on the highest shelf, half hidden by a stack of old books, sat a doll. It was small, its porcelain face pale and smooth, with large glass eyes that seemed to lie. Its lips were painted a faint pink, pulled into a knowing smile. The doll's dress, though tattered, was once elegant, a cascade of lace and satin. Emily reached for it, feeling a chill as her fingers brushed the cold porcelain. She turned it over in her hands, examining the delicate craftsmanship. The doll's eyes seemed to follow her movements, and for a moment, she swore it blinked. That one's been here forever, the shopkeeper said, startling Emily. The woman was older, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. No one's wanted it. Emily laughed nervously. Why not? It's beautiful. The shopkeeper hesitated. Some things are better left where they are. But Emily was captivated. Despite the unease curling in her stomach, she felt an inexplicable need to take the doll with her. Against the shopkeeper's muttered protests, she purchased it and carried it home. That night, Emily placed the doll on a shelf in her bedroom, where it seemed to watch over the room. She tried to ignore the feeling of being observed as she went about her evening. By the time she went to bed, she had almost forgotten about it, but sleep did not come easily. Emily's dreams were restless, filled with shadowy figures and soft whispers she couldn't understand. In her dream, the doll stood at the foot of her bed, its eyes glinting in the dark. It whispered her name. She woke with a start, her heart racing. The room was silent, but the doll was no longer on the shelf. It sat on her knit stand, its glassy eyes fixed on her. No way, she muttered, picking it up and returning it to the shelf. She chalked it up to her imagination and tried to go back to sleep, but the unease lingered. Over the next few days, strange things began happening. Objects moved from where she'd left them. Lights flickered. At night, she heard faint giggles and the soft patter of footsteps, though she lived alone. The doll's position seemed to change when she wasn't looking, its head tilted, or its smile slightly wider. Emily tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but the incidents grew harder to ignore. One evening, as she worked on her laptop, the screen went black. When it flickered back to life, words were scrawled across the screen. "You shouldn't have taken me." Her blood ran cold. She turned to the doll, sitting innocently on the shelf. "This isn't happening," she whispered, but deep down, she knew it was. Determined to understand what was happening, Emily researched the doll. She found nothing until she returned to the antique shop. The shopkeeper's face darkened when she saw Emily. "I told you to leave it be," she said. "What is it?" Emily demanded. "Why is this happening?" The shopkeeper sighed and retrieved an old ledger from behind the counter. She flipped through its pages until she found an entry about the doll. It belonged to a little girl named Annabelle. The shopkeeper explained. She died young, under mysterious circumstances. Her mother, overcome with grief, sought the help of unconventional means to bind her daughter's spirit to the doll. But something went wrong. The doll is cursed. Emily's hands trembled. "How do I stop it?" The shopkeeper shook her head. "I don't know. But the doll doesn't want to be owned. You need to find a way to appease it, or destroy it." That night, Emily returned home, with the shopkeeper's warning echoing in her mind. The doll sat on the shelf, its glassy eyes gleaming in the dim light. As Emily stared at it, she realized the smile on its face had grown wider. What will Emily do next? Will she uncover the secret to breaking the doll's curse, or will its sinister power consume her? Stay tuned for the next spine-chilling session of The Forgotten Doll, A Curse Unleashed.